Picture two neighbors, same street, same general age, both working professionals with decent careers. The first one has a freshly leased SUV in the driveway. Nice watch. Takes regular trip. You've seen the posts. Dresses sharp at the school pickup. Everything about their life, from the outside, reads as successful. The second neighbor drives something forgettable. A few years old, nothing remarkable. Their house is tidy, but not renovated. They dress fine, just not in a way that announces anything. You've never really thought much about them financially. They just seem ordinary. Now here's the question nobody asks out loud. Which one of them is actually doing better? Because I'll tell you this, in that scenario, more often than not, it's the second one, not always, but more often than the odds would suggest. And the reason why is worth understanding, because it's not just about money habits. It's about something deeper. It's about what people are actually buying when they always spend and in what they're quietly giving away in the process. This is a script about the gap between looking wealthy and being wealthy, about why that gap exists, why it keeps growing, and why the people who quietly close it tend to live better in almost every way that actually matters. The confusion that costs people everything. Let's name the core confusion first, because everything else flows from it. Most people, somewhere in the back of their minds, believe that income and wealth are roughly the same thing, that earning more means having more, that a higher salary is a more secure life, and on the surface, that seems logical. Of course, earning more is better than earning less, but income and wealth are not the same thing. They're not even close. Income is what flows in. Wealth is what stays. And the gap between those two things, the gap between what comes in and what actually remains, accumulates and builds, is entirely determined by behavior, by choices, by what you decide to do with the distance between earning and spending. Here's where the confusion does its damage. When people increase their income, most of them also increase their spending. Not because they're irresponsible, but because everything around them, advertising, social circles, cultural messages, tells them that more earnings entitle them to a more visible life, better car, bigger house, nicer things. And because everyone around them is doing the same, it feels normal. It feels like the natural order. What actually happens financially is that the new income gets converted into new lifestyle almost immediately. And the wealth gap, the actual distance between what someone has and what they owe, between what they've built and what their life costs to maintain, stays the same or quietly widens. The person who looked impressive 3 years ago and the person who looked ordinary 3 years ago can end up in completely different financial positions today. Not because one earned dramatically more, but because one kept the gap between income and spending wide and the other collapsed it. Every time your income rises, ask one question before anything else. How much of this am I going to let stay invisible? The answer to that question, repeated over years, is what actually determines financial security. The status spending mechanism, how it really works. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to spend their way into financial fragility. It never happens that cleanly. It happens gradually through a mechanism that's worth understanding because once you see it, you can't unsee it. It starts with comparison. Not aggressive, conscious comparison, just the ambient kind. You notice what the people around you have, what your peers are driving, where your colleagues are vacationing, what the neighborhood a few streets over looks like compared to yours. The brain processes all of this automatically, measuring your position relative to others. That's not a personality flaw. That's just how human social cognition works. The problem is what happens next. When that comparison creates discomfort, when you feel slightly behind, slightly less than, slightly outside the circle of people who seem to be doing well, the fastest available remedy is a visible purchase. Something that shifts the signal. Something that says, I'm here too. I'm at this level. I belong in this tier. And the purchase works. There's a real temporary feeling of resolution. The anxiety of comparison quiets. The social positioning feels restored. The brain marks the transaction as successful. Until the next comparison, which is never far away. This is how status spending becomes a cycle rather than a series of one-off decisions. It's not that people buy things they don't need, it's that they're using purchases to manage a social anxiety that purchases can never permanently resolve, because the thing generating the anxiety never goes away. There will always be someone with a newer car, a larger house, a more impressive holiday. The comparison never ends, which means the cycle never ends, which means the spending never ends. The person who escapes this cycle doesn't do it through sheer willpower. They do it by fundamentally reorienting what they're measuring. They stop measuring themselves against visible external markers and start measuring against their own actual goals. What they're building, what they're moving toward, what their financial life will look like in 10 years. That shift breaks the loop, not perfectly and not all at once, but it breaks it. Next time a purchase feels urgent, pause and ask, am I buying this because I genuinely want it or because something made me feel behind? That question alone will save you more money than any budget ever will. The hidden costs of a visible life. Here's what rarely gets calculated. When you signal a high standard of living, you don't just spend more upfront. You create a set of ongoing obligations that follow you forward. Think about the car first because it's the most visible example most people deal with directly. A man I'll call David decided at 32 that his old sedan didn't fit where he was in life anymore. He bought something new, nicer, financed over 5 years. The monthly payment was manageable. The insurance jumped. The registration cost more. He started parking more carefully, which somehow translated to eating out near wherever he parked so he wouldn't have to move the car. Small things. None of them dramatic, all of them real. 2 years later, when a genuinely good investment opportunity came up, a chance to buy into something small and promising with a friend who had the same opportunity, David didn't have the available cash. Not because he earned badly, because his money was already spoken for in 12 different directions, all quietly serving a standard of living he'd built around how things looked rather than how they served him. The car was never just the car. It was the insurance, the maintenance expectation, the lifestyle creep around it, and, most expensively, the opportunity cost. The thing he couldn't do because that money was already committed. Visible life has invisible tails. Every upgrade to your apparent standard of living creates downstream obligations that compound quietly. And the cost isn't just financial, it's the options you no longer have, the flexibility that got spent before you even realized it was there. This shows up in housing just as sharply. The couple that stretches for the house in the better-looking neighborhood and finds 18 months later that the mortgage is fine, but the life around it, the renovations the house seemed to need, the social expectations of the area, the school uniforms, the keeping up, has silently eliminated every margin they had. The house wasn't just the house. It was a new cost structure they moved into and now live inside. Before any significant lifestyle upgrade, calculate not just the direct cost, but the tail cost. Everything the upgrade will pull along behind it for the next 5 years. That's the actual price. What appearing ordinary actually protects. This is the part of the conversation that gets skipped, and it shouldn't. Living modestly doesn't just save money, it actively protects things that are hard to rebuild once lost. It protects your negotiating position. When the people across from you in any financial conversation, an employer, a landlord, a contractor, a business partner, can't read your financial comfort level from your appearance, you hold more information than they do. You can walk away from things that don't serve you without it being visible that you need the deal. That's real leverage, and it's built not by performance, but by the quiet reality of having options. It protects your relationships. Money creates distortion in relationships, and the distortion runs both ways. When people know or assume you're doing well, some are drawn closer for the wrong reasons. Others pull back because they assume you're out of their world now. Still others start to measure their interactions with you against what they think you can provide. None of this is necessarily malicious. It's just human, but it changes things. It layers an economic dimension onto connections that were better without it. Living quietly keeps more of your relationships in their natural form. It protects your peace. There's a specific kind of mental load that comes with maintaining a visible financial image. The constant low-level tracking. Are things still looking right? Is this consistent with last year? What does this choice say about where I am? Eats cognitive bandwidth that could be doing something else. The person who isn't managing an image isn't carrying that load. Their mental energy stays available for actual decisions, actual relationships, actual life, and it protects your options. This is the most practically valuable thing it does. The person with a modest, visible lifestyle can take the pay cut for the more interesting job, can take time to figure out what they actually want to build, can absorb a bad year without it becoming a crisis visible to everyone who knows them. Their financial resilience is private, which means it's real, not dependent on appearances holding together under pressure. Takeaway: think of modest living not as restriction, but as protection. of your negotiating power, your relationships, your mental bandwidth, and your options. Those are worth more than they cost. The quiet compounding of invisible discipline. There's a math to this that's worth understanding, not as a lecture, but as a reality check. The person who consistently keeps the gap between earnings and visible spending, who resists lifestyle inflation, who lets each income increase build something rather than fund something visible, is doing something with their money that barely shows in year 1 or year 2. But by year 8 or year 10, they're living in a fundamentally different financial reality from the person who spent everything that came in, even if both people earned roughly the same amounts. The difference isn't dramatic frugality. It's not extreme sacrifice. It's the consistent, quiet habit of keeping the gap wide, of letting the invisible side of the ledger grow faster than the visible side. Consider 2 women, similar careers, similar earnings across a decade. One consistently upgraded her lifestyle with each income increase. Better apartment, better car, better wardrobe, better holidays. Her life looked progressively more successful and felt progressively more fragile, because every raise got absorbed immediately, leaving no margin and no accumulation. The other kept her visible spending fairly stable as her income grew. She drove the same car for 7 years, stayed in the apartment that was genuinely comfortable rather than impressive. She spent on things she genuinely enjoyed, travel, food, time, but she didn't perform. By year 10, the invisible side of her financial life had compounded into something real. Options she hadn't anticipated, security she didn't need to announce. A kind of quiet confidence that had nothing to do with what her car or apartment communicated to anyone. Same earnings, completely different financial positions. The difference was entirely in the gap, how consistently she kept it wide, how stubbornly she refused to let visible spending absorb every increase. You don't need to earn more than everyone around you. You need to keep more than everyone around you. The gap between income and visible spending, maintained consistently, is the engine of actual wealth. Social pressure is a financial force. Name it. Let's be direct about something that usually stays implicit in these conversations. The people around you exert real financial pressure, not necessarily consciously, not necessarily with bad intentions, but real continuous pressure toward a visible standard that matches where they think you are, where they think you should be, or where they want to be themselves. It comes from friends suggesting holidays that stretch your budget because everyone's going. From family members whose expectations calibrate to what they perceive your income to be. From colleagues whose lifestyle conversations subtly establish a baseline that makes your own choices feel out of step if they fall below it. From social media that presents a curated, edited version of how your peers are living that becomes somehow the unconscious benchmark for what's normal. None of this is a conspiracy. All of it is real. And the people most protected from it are the ones who decided, somewhere along the way, that they weren't going to make financial decisions based on what those pressures required of them. Who got comfortable saying, that doesn't really work for me right now, without the explanation and without the guilt, who separated their self-worth cleanly enough from their visible financial position that the pressure doesn't find much purchase. This is genuinely hard. It requires a level of social security, a comfort with being quietly different that most people don't develop automatically, but it can be developed. And the first step is simply naming the pressure when you feel it, not as an accusation toward whoever's generating it, just as information. I'm feeling pressure right now to spend in a way that doesn't serve me. I see it. I don't have to follow it. Identify the 2 or 3 social contexts in your life where financial pressure is highest. Name them. Decide in advance how you'll respond when the pressure arrives. Not reactively, but from a position you chose beforehand. What real wealth feels like from the inside. We talk about wealth in numbers, in net worth figures, and investment balances and income brackets, and those things are real. I'm not dismissing the math. But there's a phenomenology to genuine financial security that almost never gets described. What it actually feels like from the inside to have built something real and quiet over time. It feels like the job negotiation where you can walk away and mean it. Where the number they offer doesn't make you panic because your life doesn't depend on this particular outcome. Where you can negotiate from a position of genuine choice rather than anxious need. It feels like the unexpected expense that doesn't derail anything. The car repair, the medical bill, the appliance that needs replacing, and the quiet relief of being able to handle it without restructuring your entire financial life or carrying stress about it for 3 months. It feels like the morning you wake up and realize you haven't thought about money anxiously in a while. Not because you're ignoring it, But because your relationship with it has changed, it's no longer a constant background source of pressure. It's a resource you manage with reasonable calm. It feels like the option you didn't know you'd want until you needed it. The ability to change something, a job, a city, a direction, without being locked in place by the cost structure of a life that looks impressive but holds you hostage. None of these feelings are visible. You can't photograph them. You can't post them. Nobody at the school pickup will notice them. But they're real and they're valuable and they compound just like money does. Because the security builds on itself, the options beget more options, and the peace creates the mental space for better decisions, which produce better outcomes, which deepen the security. That's what's on offer when you choose to build quietly rather than perform loudly. Not deprivation, not a smaller life, a freer one. Freedom versus performance. The only question that matters. Let me leave you with a frame that I think is worth carrying forward. Every financial decision you make is, at its core, a vote for one of two things: freedom or performance. Performance says, spend in a way that communicates something to the people around you. Signal your position, confirm your arrival, stay current with the visible standard of your peer group. It's not irrational, performance has social returns, but it has a price, and the price is paid in options, in flexibility, in the quiet accumulation of something genuinely yours. Freedom says, spend in a way that serves you, your actual goals, your actual comfort, your actual future. Keep the gap wide, let the invisible side grow. Accept that your financial life might look ordinary from the outside while becoming genuinely strong on the inside. Most people never consciously choose between these two. They drift toward performance because the pressures pulling that direction are constant, and the rewards are immediate and visible. The returns on freedom are slower, quieter, and private. But here's what I know. The people who ended up with real financial security, not the performance of it, but the actual thing, almost universally made the same quiet choice at some point. They decided that their financial life was for them, not for the people watching, that the real measure wasn't what it looked like, but what it gave them, what it allowed, what pressure it removed from their days. Real wealth is not the car in the driveway. It is not the postcode. It is not the watch or the wardrobe or the holiday that photographs well. Real wealth is the phone call you don't dread, the Monday morning that doesn't feel like a trap, the option to choose differently if you want to, the life that runs on your terms because you spent years building it quietly, patiently, without needing anyone to see it happening. That's what's available, not to the loudest earner, not to the most impressively dressed, to the most quietly disciplined, to the person who decided early enough and firmly enough that they were building something real. And that real didn't need to be visible to be valuable. Start there, everything else follows.